I'm having to resort to bribery to get them out this morning, and it seems to have worked a little bit too well. They were all in bed, weren't you? You were all in bed, yes. One for Maggie. Developing corns can be a fact of life for some greyhounds. They might turn up while they're still racing, but they often appear once they're retired. If your greyhound has developed corns, what are the surgical options that you can try to help them out? If you're new to greyhounds, you could be forgiven for not knowing that dogs can develop corns at all. To learn more about what corns are and why they grow, check out part 1 in this mini-series. And for ways of trying to manage the corns at home, have a look at part 2. I've put the links to both of those in the description. And while you're here, we'd love for you to like and subscribe so we can stay in touch. One for Maggie. I fear this bribery is a little too effective. Yes. Can we think calm thoughts? Personally, when it comes to corns, my preference is to take the more conservative options first. But if that's not enough and your pet is still in discomfort, then this video is for you. Given that awareness of corns is not that widespread amongst vets in the first place, then the number of those vets who know what the options are may be even smaller. So being aware of what you could have done and the suitability of that for your pet before you go is very sensible. Today we're looking at surgical options to manage corns, and there are 3 different possibilities that the vet may be able to do. The first of these is excision of the corn itself, a surgical excision. And they physically take the whole thing out, not just the bit on the surface that you would remove if you were hulling, but everything from inside the toe as well. So it can leave a very large wound in the pad or a big hole into the toe that has to be stitched together on the pad. And this is not the same as hulling. It is really quite a serious procedure that cuts right deep into the pad, and recovery from this can take several months. And of course, during that time, you're dealing with an animal that has to be out and about with a wound in a place that on the bottom of their foot, and you're not going to be allowed to get it wet. The recovery, trying to keep it dry and clean, is not going to be easy if you opt for surgical excision of the corn. More importantly, studies have shown that the success rate of this procedure is actually quite low. So they may remove the corn at the time, but it doesn't change what's happening within the foot to cause the corn in the first place. And in half of cases, that corn will come right back within a year. So you go through all that recovery process, all that difficulty with the dog, and you're back to square one a year later. Now, I did have this done on my first Jimmy, and this was a long time ago now when it was one of the few options available. And in his case, the corn was tucked up right in between his toes, a very strange place, really, very hard to get at. My current Jimmy is now deciding to stick his nose in front of the camera. So it was easier to look after the surgery because it wasn't against the ground. But because the corn had formed where he was missing a toe, and the way the pressure was going into that area couldn't be changed at all, then eventually it did come back. So ultimately we went through a lot of difficulty and we didn't resolve the problem. The second option that your vet might offer you, that was Floppy's nose in the middle of the camera now. Are you in the way, Floppy? So the second option that your vet might offer you is to amputate the entire toe. And of course, that is definitely going to prevent recurrence of the corn on that toe. You're not going to get a corn if there is no toe. However, as we saw in part 1, the weight of the body has to go down into the ground somewhere. And if you take that toe away, then that weight is going to be distributed down into the ground through a different toe. So there's a good chance you're going to see a corn developing on a different toe instead because you've changed their feet. And there are limits to how many toes you can cut off. I do hear of people where the dog's got corns on every foot, or sometimes multiple toes on each of the feet. Well, how many toes are you going to cut off? So this is only really a reasonable option if they start off with all their toes, which they don't always, and that the rest of those toes are fine. So in the case of my last Jimmy, he already had a missing toe and it was one of the middle toes. So to take off the other middle toe would have made life very difficult for him. It's the middle toes that mainly take the weight. So if he'd been left with just the outer two toes, it would have been very difficult for him to walk with that foot.
There was me thinking I'd get a day off, but apparently the dogs feel the need to renegotiate their appearance fees, so if you bear with us, we'll be back soon.
Our third option when it comes to surgery is a more recent development called a flexotenotomy. And this is a situation where they cut the tendon that flexes the toe instead of removing the toe. And the technique has been in use on people for some time, but it's a recent development by Mike Gilliard that it would be used on dogs. This takes away the pressure point because when you cut the tendon, the toe no longer presses down into the floor when the dog walks, and that stops the hard skin forming. It stops the corn forming. There's no need to remove the actual corn after this surgery because it will stop developing and it will disappear or fall out on its own accord in a few weeks. No pressure, no corn, no pain. And this does seem like quite miraculous. If you've had a dog that's really been struggling, you will see a big difference. They'll have a whole new lease of life after having been hardly able to walk previously. Huh? Yeah, you're lucky, aren't you? You've got good feet. Yeah, big paddly feet, but there's no corns. That's a good chap. So cutting this tendon stops the paw pad pressing on the ground when the dog walks. The surgery is carried out via a little incision, which typically heals in about 10 days, and they're back to walking normally very, very quickly. There's no wound that's going to touch the ground that has to be kept clean and dry for weeks on end. So it seems pretty amazing. Is there anything that can go wrong? Initially, there were some problems with the tendon rejoining after the procedure, so the technique was improved so that a little bit was excised from the superficial digital tendon rather than just cutting it. And this means it's technically called a tendinectomy rather than a tenotomy. And there is less chance of the two ends of the tendon now joining because there's a gap. Your vet may refer to this as SFDT, which stands for superficial flexor digital tenotomy. The toe is likely to appear longer afterwards and perhaps tilt up slightly because the tendon isn't making it bend down to the floor. This could mean you need to trim the nail more often because it isn't going to wear, it's not going to touch the ground in order to be worn down. And the treated toe does need other healthy toes around it, next to it for support. So in the case of my Jimmy, who had that one where the toe was missing, that wouldn't have worked for him because the toe that would have supported the one that had had this procedure didn't exist anymore. It isn't the ideal solution for every dog, but it can be a good solution for some. Although the corn is unlikely to return on the treated toe, I have heard reports of corns forming on adjacent toes afterwards within maybe the next year or so. And as we've said before, the weight has to go somewhere. If we take the pressure off this toe, it's going to go onto a different toe, whether it's another toe on that foot or a toe on a different foot. Now, I have known vets do 2 or 3 of these under one anaesthetic, so do be sure that all feet have been checked before you agree to go ahead and be very clear about what you're having done. I did work with one person who went to the vet to have a corn treated in this way. My recommendation that they discuss it with their vet. And afterwards, I saw the dog again, and that toe had been treated on that one foot. And I said, well, what about the other one? Because there was an equally big corn on the other foot that had been left. And they ended up having to go back, having to pay again. And yeah, that might have been covered by insurance, but it meant the dog had to have another anaesthetic within a short space of time, which isn't always a good idea. So it would have been better if that vet had done both at once. So do be sure exactly the extent of the issue and what you're going to discuss with the vet before you make your appointment. So there is a lot to think about when it comes to dealing with corns. If you're trying to decide what to do to the best, here are some of the questions you might want to ask yourself to help you decide what you're going to do. Firstly, how big an impact is this corn having on the quality of life for your dog? If it's a case that you have hard floors and they walk a lot on pavements, it perhaps is more of a concern than if you have carpets and they walk mostly on grass, or perhaps they're elderly and don't do a lot of walking full stop. So it's going to affect them more often. How comfortable is the dog with having their feet handled? If regular management at home upsets them or is difficult for you, then perhaps surgery is going to be the best option. And do you feel able to do what needs to be done for conservative management at home? I'm quite happy crawling around on the floor, clipping nails or doing things to feet, but not everyone is comfortable with that, in which case it's not going to be practical for you to make them comfortable at home yourself. And is surgery an option? It's going to be done under anaesthetic, which might be a poor option for an elderly greyhound or one who's very anxious about going to the vet. And of course, can you find a vet who is experienced in the procedure in order to do this for you? Flexotenotomy is quite a new process. Not all vets know about it, even if they're aware that the dog might have corns in the first place. And so they may not be trained to do it. Some may instead suggest that you have a surgical excision or the toe removed, even though those are not necessarily the best options at this moment. And of course, is the cost affordable to you? Is it going to be covered by insurance? If your greyhound developed corns before you homed them, it's possible an insurer might try to say it's a pre-existing condition, or perhaps you've had one corn treated and then they come back with another corn and they might try to exclude that because it's a pre-existing condition, even though it's a different corn on a different toe. So do think about that as well. My first choice would always be conservative management at home, like the sort of things that we looked at in part 2. But that's my personal choice. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's right for me. It doesn't mean it's right for you. So you do have to think about what is going to be best for you in your situation. But if I was going to have surgery done, then I would only consider the flexotenotomy. I wouldn't have a surgical excision, definitely not that. I might consider the removal of the toe, but I would probably prefer the flexotenotomy if I was going to make a surgical choice in terms of managing that dog's foot long term. So these are never easy decisions, but if you can... Oh, excuse me. Are you shouting out there, Maggie? I don't know who she's shouting at. That was a big woof. These are never easy decisions, but if you can go to your vet armed with the information you need, at least you can then have a sensible discussion about it. And if you need to find out more, then the Greyhound Health Initiative does have a lot on their website about corns and on the different procedures. So if you do decide to take the surgical route, it's well worth having a look there, and they may be able to recommend a vet that you can use. I hope you found this mini series on corns to be helpful. It was something that our viewers asked for me to make videos on, so I hope you have enjoyed them and they've been informative for you. We'd love to hear your experience of greyhounds with corns in the comments, of course. That's all from me and the gang today. Hopefully Floppy will be here at least briefly next time, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.